Good afternoon, everybody. So I see we are gradually building up the number of participants. So we will start with the webinar on leading indicator forecasting for mainly focusing on the automotive market today. So I'm here together with my colleague Gylian Verstraete, who will have a further deep dive on, I think, some interesting findings on how to optimize demand and supply, especially in the current times following the COVID disruptions in the automotive market. So our webinar is centered around our solution Live, which is a leading indicator forecasting engine. So the agenda of today is, first of all, we will give you some introduction to that, not too long, but so that you have a good understanding of what these leading indicators mean and how we use them in our analysis. Then Gylian will further deep dive on the value chain in the automotive supply chain and see how we can help you in finding interesting indicators that help to explain what is happening and how you can better anticipate also the effects of the semiconductor shortage now that's actually happening in the sector. So, and then we still foresee 10 to 15 minutes for any question you might have combined with some conclusions from our side. So let's now maybe move to that introduction. So some of you might be already acquainted with the concept of leading indicators. So essentially what we aim to do from a high level point of view is bringing a data-driven reasoning. So, and this within changing environments, especially we have lived at the last year, of course, a very dynamic change that came in view of the disruptions, sanitary disruptions. The surveys that and the analysis that we made are based on millions of indicators that we have in our database. So we have them spread all over the world. So from the east to the west, we have them in the Chinese part of the world, but also in, of course, in Europe, in the Latin American and the North American markets. So, and these databases, they can be both databases coming from official instances such as FRED and Eurostat offices or the National Bureau of Statistics from China, but also it can also be private data, so that we gather from other institutions. And the goal of this whole setup is that we find indicators that have a predictive value, which help you to look into the future and anticipate certain trends on average with a 3 to 12 month horizon. So we are basically speaking here about tactical insights, tactical forecasting based on external indicators or in public environments or coming from private databases. We have a dedicated team for that. So Gylian, who will take over later on in the seminar, he's both a business consultant in the matter, but he's also a PhD in data scientist. So he is very senior and he helped also building our product. So a little word on these indicators. Typically in a traditional way of forecasting, what will happen is that in many cases, the forecast, the traditional statistical methods, they will follow the trends. So if the trend is business or sales is going up, market is going up, the statistical forecasting engine will more or less do the same because it does not have enough information to understand that there will be bending points, inflection points, because simply the information is not available within the data set. It only has the historical information about the target variable itself. And of course, it can find seasonal patterns, but it's very difficult to anticipate on patterns that are only available in external data. And so this is the whole concept. So where you see also on the lower side of the graphic that you have this lead. So we call that the lag, and that's also the terminology where is leading indicators coming from, because there is a certain predictive value of certain indicators for your target variable. And it can be 1 month, can be 3 months, but it could even be 12 months or 15 months. And typically what we do is identify this type of indicators for a specific business, for a specific market, for a specific business unit. So that could be anything that is for you of which is a focus for you to understand. And then we, in the next step, can build predictive models based on our machine learning engines that will integrate these indicators into a predictive model. So which will help you to also forecast these trends. But there is more than that. So let's move to the next one. So if here you have an overview of the services that typically we deliver, and then we go to the automotive part. So you see on the left-hand side, the sources that we use combined with your internal data. Typically, we will identify the indicators that are relevant for your business unit, for your sales, for your market, for your industry. And we will do that through a matching process. So for which we have also developed specific technology, but also able to take into account previous difficult periods. And with difficult periods, we mean like recession periods, where we also find valuable information on how typically the system behaves following a crisis or a certain disruption. And then, as said before, we can integrate that information into an intelligent predictive model, so that we will also update regularly if there would be also an evolution in the type of indicators that will affect your business. And then finally, we can go one step further, and that is making scenarios. So also making scenarios about the indicators themselves, projections, and integrate that in a business scenario for you. So that allows you to look even further than 3, 6, 9 months, even look 15 to 18 months, based on the number of assumptions that we shared with you, and which gives you a lot of insights in how your business might evolve based on the underlying drivers that we have identified. So now I hand over to Gylian, so who will give an example of the work he did for automotive. So Gylian, the word is to you.
Yes, thank you, Christophe. So let's maybe first take a look at how a typical automotive supply chain is built. So in the center of the supply chain, you have the vehicle manufacturers. Those are all the very familiar brands, the Fords, the Volkswagens, the Toyotas of this world. And they typically have a very strong bargaining power in the entire supply chain. So if you look further upstream in the supply chain, who delivers to vehicle OEMs, those are the tier ones. The tier ones, they basically provide the parts for that go into the cars. And for even further upstream, you have the upstream suppliers. So they are delivering onto the tier ones. The typical production process of cars, typically the OEMs use a just-in-time inventory system to increase the efficiencies and decrease waste for them in the production process. This also typically reduces inventory costs for those OEMs. But as you can imagine, if they have very few inventory next to their production line, that puts a lot of responsibility at the tier ones and the upstream suppliers, because they really need to deliver on time. And if you've ever seen a production process of a car, that's typically a very long production process which goes in a line. So if there is a vital part missing, well, then typically the entire supply or the entire production line needs to come to a halt. So in the end, that gives the tier ones an enormous responsibility to deliver their goods on time and in the correct volumes to the vehicle OEMs. They're also very depending on the OEMs. They have typically contracts with them that they need to provide with huge penalties if they don't. And they're also very depending on it in the sense that the only behavior that they are seeing is the behavior that the OEM provides to the tier ones. So they don't have a direct feedback loop to the consumer or to the car dealerships. No, they can buy such data, but typically the OEMs, the only source of information they see is the demand pattern of the OEMs. If we then look further downstream, then we see that typically those vehicles that are being sold to consumers via car dealerships. So car dealerships, they sell cars to producers, to consumers, and they receive cars from the OEMs. But also they are very depending on the OEMs in the sense that the OEM delivers the goods to the car dealerships. And if you're in a supply constraint time period, such as we are in today, then not all, it's not being said that all vehicles that you order will be delivered to you. So in that sense, you're depending on the OEM to deliver you the vehicles. But typically they are also depending on the OEM for their financing through floor plan leasing. So what does this mean? Typically, if you go to a car dealer on the car lot, there's typically cars, and often they are financed by loans, which are coming from the OEMs. So they also have a financial dependentship on the OEMs. So they can also be very complex. Here we see that simply one line, but of course the car does not come or does not have one part. So there's typically a lot of tier ones. We're linked to a lot of upstream suppliers. There's also many car dealers. So the supply chain becomes in the end very complex. So I've already told you that the OEMs, they have a just-in-time inventory mechanism in which they are really depending on the tier ones to have the goods delivered to them. So you can imagine that if there is a certain shortage of a certain part, then that can give a huge problem for the OEMs. So that's the reality where we live in today. Currently, we have a semiconductor shortage on the market, but maybe let's first dig a little bit deeper how this semiconductor shortage has started. So it all started basically in a year and a half ago in Q1 2020. So we all know about this disease by now called COVID. It has surfaced and it has spread all over the globe. And in Q1, most countries in the world, they started going into lockdowns. In Q2, the companies, they basically assessed the seriousness of the situation. And yeah, if you think that there's a recession on the horizon, then typically companies go into cash protection modes. So what did the OEMs do? They canceled a lot of orders. And of course, this created a ripple effect in the supply chain. In the end, the orders for semiconductors, they got canceled as well. And the manufacturers of the semiconductors, they basically were able to allocate their production to goods that were in very high demand during the lockdown. We all remember we needed an extra screen of some sort to let kids follow online lectures or to just for amusement. Also, GPUs and CPUs were in a lot more demand during that period. So semiconductor manufacturers, they did not really have any issues with that. In Q3 and Q4, demand for vehicles started to recover, but capacity was kind of limited at the semiconductor sites. So although that capacity had been promised to other goods, so it was quite difficult to get your hands on semiconductors at the end of last year. And actually, this situation became a lot worse. In Q1 2021, there was a big fire in a Japanese semiconductor plant, which led to a very big reduction in the available capacity of semiconductors for the automotive market. There's also been winter storms in Texas, and that's where in the US a lot of that semiconductor capacity is available. And at the moment, or in Q2, was the expectation that the biggest production restrictions related to that shortage was able to, or was present. And in the end, even there were news articles, for example, Ford had to cut 50% of its production volumes in Q2. So that's a very drastic measure to take. I've also read a recent article that there's still production issues at Ford. So this to show that, well, this shortage is certainly not over yet. So the question is, of course, what can you do about it if you don't if you cannot magically produce or create a semiconductor plant? Well, we have a data-driven approach which can aid you in anticipating for future evolutions. So what can you do about it? Well, we propose actually two things. First one is building scenarios. So those scenarios are all about what will the impact be? Will it be over pretty soon? Yes or no? Will it take some longer time to recover? How big are your clients going to be impacted? What's your impact going to be on your sales? From what we've heard and what we've seen in the data, and I'll come back to that at a later point in stage. A lot of the OEMs, they asked their upstream suppliers to continue producing. But of course, that's not a situation that you can continue or that can continue going if that semiconductor shortage persists over time. And then where can our methodology come in? Well, you can basically also monitor how this shortage is evolving over time. And that will help you in deciding which scenario is for you most likely. So we have created several dashboards for that. So we are able to let you monitor how the demand and the production evolves in that supply chain. You can also monitor how inventories evolve in that supply chain. And you can monitor how the prices evolve in that supply chain. So let me first start by introducing the concept of a proxy. So a proxy indicator is basically an indicator that captures the behavior of something unobservable or immeasurable of very difficult to measure variable. So if we relate that to our automotive supply chain, we have the vehicle sales time series. Vehicle sales are the sales that happen between the dealership and the consumer. We also have a leading indicator proxy for the motor vehicle manufacturers, so the OEMs. And that is the number of cars that get assembled in every month. If we move further upstream, we get another leading indicator, the industrial production of motor vehicle parts. And that is a proxy for the demand that's coming to the tier ones. If you then move even further upstream, we get also the industrial production for auto parts and allied goods. So those are goods which are used to produce the auto parts. So this will allow us to basically monitor how the demand in each of those echelons is evolving. So if you go to our first dashboard, then you can see many lines. And all those lines, they are pretty much in sync before the gray zone. So the gray zone is the recession or the impact of COVID on the demand and the production behavior. And basically what you see is that vehicle sales, vehicle assemblies, and the production of vehicle parts has been in sync before. Even also during the recession or during the decrease in the lockdown period, we see a very similar behavior between the assemblies, the sales, and the parts production. What happens afterwards is, to me, is very interesting. You can see that the vehicle assemblies and the parts, they recovered much more rapidly. But then at the start of this year in 2021, you could see that vehicle sales are actually a lot above the pre-pandemic levels. But due to that semiconductor shortage, this demand behavior could not continue. So now this behavior has fallen back in sync. So this is, of course, very interesting to monitor. If we see that vehicle assemblies start going up, that will give us a hint that the shortage is decreasing. What's next is the levels of inventory in the automotive supply chain. So here we have two main variables. Our first variable, which is the green variable. The green variable is the domestic auto inventories. So how many finished cars, finished new cars are in inventories at dealers or at the OEMs. We can see that this behavior has been decreasing over time, but starting at the start of this year, this has really deteriorated. And it has deteriorated to a point that we're in July or at 136,000 of finished vehicles in stock in the United States. That number might not tell you a lot, but if I tell you that the pre-pandemic level is around 400 to 500,000, then you can really know that, well, there's a really low stock of finished vehicles. What's even more surprising to me is that if we look at the blue line, which is the inventory of auto parts, that line is actually increasing. So this means that in the upstream part of the supply chain, we see that there are a lot of extra parts entering the supply chain, a lot of extra parts being stocked, which is the reverse behavior of the finishing of cars. So to me, that says that OEMs expect the shortage to end rather soon, or at least they hope. The final dashboard is monitoring the consumer prices. So you already probably know that new cars are in very short supply. So this, if you need a car, if you cannot buy a new car, what will you do then? Well, you will probably buy a used car. This in turn had a strong effect on the price of those used cars, and that's the red line which you see. So you can see that even at the start of the global financial crisis, there has been price increases, especially after the global financial crisis. But if you look at the price increase which happened at the start of this year, is really a different magnitude. The price of used cars has, compared to last year, skyrocketed with 50%. Well, you can say that, okay, if my price of my used cars increased, are people stopped from buying those used cars? Well, the answer for that is no. As you can see here, that's the retail sales for used cars. It has also skyrocketed in the past couple of months. So this means that there's a lot of cars still being sold at a very high price. So, okay, we've reached the conclusion now, and the question and answering part will be within 5 minutes. So as a wrap up, we see that there's a huge need for tier ones and further upstream producers in supply chain to get some more feeling about what happens in the supply chain, because they have such limited visibility on what happens in that supply chain, because what they see, the only information they actually get is the forecast they receive or the orders they receive from the OEMs. So for that, we propose to use those monitoring dashboards to monitor how the behavior is in different parts of the supply chain. What's interesting is this webinar has been for the automotive industry, but we can make separate dashboards for other industries as well. And if you're already monitoring data, or you say that, okay, monitoring data, that's cool, but we want something quantitative that we can link to our sales, then we can propose to use forecast models for that. So if you look at Effectivus time series, which we use, then if you look at the time series behavior here, if your sales is basically in a decreasing line, which Christophe told you at the beginning of the presentation, then a whole winter's forecast will typically extrapolate past trends. So here it will really, if you're in a decreasing trend, it will just extrapolate that trend and say sales will further bottom. But if you can make a leading indicator forecast model, then you can maybe detect whether sales will stabilize or whether sales will recover in the near future. And to give you an idea about how a potential forecast model can look for the automotive industry is, for example, here, you make a Effectivus model using vehicle sales in a certain country with a leading value of 3 months. So that means if vehicle sales increase today, then your sales will increase 3 months later. And typical or a known leading indicator for the automotive market is also consumer confidence. And consumer confidence can also be a leading indicator. Here we say that, okay, it's leading with a little bit more leading value, a leading value of 5 months. So this means that if consumer confidence increases now, then 5 months later, you will see an impact on your sales. So, okay, that's what I wanted to tell you on the semiconductor shortage in the automotive industry. Now we still have some time for questions, and hopefully we can also provide answers.
There is a question coming in from Klaus Win. Where do you obtain all the data from? So, Gylian?
Yes, that's a very good question. So Here the answer is that we basically offer two options. One is our huge indicator cloud. So that's what Christophe told you about at the start of the presentation. We have an automatic connection with all statistical agencies that publish publicly available data. So we have that in-house, and we have that in-house up to date. But what we also typically see is that clients, they also buy their own data. And that data can also add a lot of value. Typically the answer here is twofold. So you probably have a lot of interesting information in-house, and we can also provide some additional pieces to that puzzle.
I think the main, you gave already an answer, the main challenge here is to find the relevant data. So on the one hand, it's what are your data sources? So you answer to that. So it's a big chunk of potential data sources that we have in-house and that we sync on a continuous basis for worldwide indicators, industry indicators, global economic indicators. But also you might have private data so that you source and that we will also use. And then the challenge is indeed to identify the right indicators or the most relevant indicators that we will use in an analysis. There is a next question. So on the type of services that we offer, I think we can have a double role from a service point of view. On the one hand, we have our tooling, so which is the leading indicator forecasting solution, the database, so the external data combined with our predictive engines and our dashboarding. And then we have the business expertise also, so for a specific industry segment. And so we will identify what is relevant for you, build the models, but also we can assist you in building the scenarios. And we can do that for a given business unit. We can do that for a global market. That's really depending on your context and on your priorities. You're doing that currently for some bigger companies. So where we go into the business unit detail and find all the nitty-gritty details that are affecting their business. So combining consultancy with the intelligent analytics that we have developed with our predictive engines and our global databases. So there's another one coming in from Nikita Iserson, if I speak that out well. So if we use inter-industry or interim networks to forecast these leading indicators. And I see example given input-output tables and Leontief models, Gylian.
Yeah, so what we've been doing, and that's a very good point. If you have, for example, one indicator that is leading your sales with a couple of months, might be interested to know where that indicator is heading. So there's multiple possibilities on that side. We could allow you to create your own forecasts. For example, we've seen that companies, they can use, for example, an estimation where the oil price is heading and use that in a quantitative model to forecast your sales. But we could also work with forecasting indicators to see where could that indicator be heading to.
Yeah, so and I made a mistake. It is inter-firm network, so I was reading that wrong. So Bas Heemskerk has another question for us. So are you able to share a reference of a tier 1 customer? What we can say is that we are working intensively for a chemical company or companies that work on a multinational basis and have indeed as their target industries then different segments. That can be in aviation, but it can also be in oil and gas, it can be in healthcare, can be in automotive, and I think we cannot put immediately the name here on it, but we're also doing some work for another company, which is not a multinational, but also operating on a global basis with a little bit the same challenge, having multiple business segments that they are delivering in, and really looking to better understand how the market dynamics could evolve and are evolving. I see here also a comment where he is mentioning, we see here a perfect example of the bullwhip effect, where the negative effect of the shortage is that everywhere in supply chain companies are increasing their buffer stocks, which further increases the shortages. Is this also something you can put inside your models? I think that's a great question, Gylian.
That's a really good question. I think the answer here is definitely yes. We've seen that we have indicators related to inventories. So that's a perfect indicator for that. What we also have is indicators related to the number of orders, or maybe the number of unfilled orders even in certain industries. So that's all data we can use to put this in a model.
So Gylian, if there is one thing you would give as a message from the work you have been doing the last months, also following this disruptions and all these disruptions in the supply chain, what is your main takeaway for yourself doing all the work of the past months?
Yes, that's a very good question. So my main takeaway is that it really pays off to do these kinds of analyses. You can see that if you're only getting your orders from the OEM or from your clients, then you maybe only see half of the situation. And in the end, if you end up with a lot of stock or with the supply chain that cannot be easily switched on and off, then you might be in a lot of trouble. So really, these techniques, they can help you month over month to monitor how the situation evolves and what potential impact can be on your sales or your industry.
It's 3 minutes, but still questions coming in. A very specific one. How long do you expect that the shortage of semiconductors will last? What is your crystal ball, Gylian?
Yes, my crystal ball. So what do we expect is that, or what do I expect at least? It's not easy to buy or to build a semiconductor plant. So in the next couple of years, maybe we're going to have a shortage of semiconductors. But it's not being said that right now there's a lot of impact for the automotive industry. And the main impact is even for the automotive industry. So it's not being said that the impact will be years, or there will be such a significant impact for years on the automotive industry. So that's where it gets really interesting.
And how do you see the impact on the competition within industries? What's your feeling about that? And also maybe the data that you found already. So because semiconductors are becoming more and more popular, so you find them also more and more in even mobility solutions like bikes that get more and more sophisticated. So what's your view on that, and how would you monitor that in the future?
Yes, that's a very good question. There's a big number of items every year that gain semiconductors, and also like if you look at cars, it's not the same anymore as it was 5 years ago, right, or 10 years ago. So in every item that is already using semiconductors uses a lot more semiconductors over time. So in the end, it's really something that's evolving, and more and more types of goods get semiconductors, and more semiconductors go into goods. So it's something very dynamic to analyze. Yeah. So it's not a really easy answer to give.
No, but I'm sure with the global data and the regional data we have, that could be a very good exercise also to work further on, to understand better how these type of semiconductors are being consumed, and what's the evolution and the growth in certain industries. So because that also influences, of course, who is getting what, and specific shortages in some industries. It's like the competition with the health industry now for the last year, because of certain basic materials they were acquiring and were competing with other industries they competed less with in the future. So that's also maybe a lesson learned, that some things changed last year, and industries were competing with one another in a completely different way for raw materials or semi finished goods. So we are at the end of our timing. I think this were very nice questions that we received from the audience, so thank you for that. So as mentioned earlier, it would be great if you would contact us directly for any other question or analysis you might have. So please don't hesitate to reach out to Gylian or myself, and we look forward to work with the team on any time of comment, question, or concern, challenge you might have. Thanks a lot for your attention. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.